Let's get into the crypto markets with AdvisorShares ETF strategist Mackenzie Peterson. Welcome, Mackenzie.
Hey guys, great to be on. Thanks so much for having me.
Glad to have you on. So, 2023, we saw an increase in the price of Bitcoin. We've had some stumbles recently because of the crackdown on the centralized exchanges in the U.S. What's your long-term outlook, or at least to the end of the year, which I guess wouldn't be long-term, it'd be short-term?
We're halfway through. That makes sense. Totally fair. It's been a ride. I feel like, coming from the world of cannabis, used to a bit of a bumpy ride and not afraid of volatility in the long term.
Yeah, but you had some stuff to calm you down when you had the volatility.
That is true. I need it. It is very true. But as you mentioned, regulatory challenges kind of still exist. But I hope, as people are saying, that maybe it'll give us a little bit of clarity in the long term. We'll see. You never know. But year to date, seems like Bitcoin has been having a great year. Still not sure again how the SEC action is really going to affect it. You guys were mentioning not yet so far. We'll see what happens. You never know. But I wish I had more insight in that aspect. But overall, I think we've just seen some encouraging signals that show that there could be strength to come in Bitcoin, which is great. So love to see that. Very excited to see what's coming up.
So AdvisorShares, you guys are involved in, your ETF does Bitcoin futures, correct? I mean, obviously no spot Bitcoin ETF. Don't expect it anytime soon with Gensler running things. But you have the you have the futures ETF. The price of futures are dependent in many ways with what goes on the centralized exchanges, U.S. centralized exchanges. And even though Gensler doesn't seem to be anti-Bitcoin, nonetheless, it seems that those centralized exchanges might have problems elsewhere with him. What kind of risks do you guys model for, and how do you overcome that?
So I think ultimately the product is designed to have sort of that risk managed component. So managing the exposure to Bitcoin over time. So you'd have to ask Mark Yusko, who is the manager of it, who would, have more insight in terms of where he's seeing the risk, when he's turning on exposure, when he's turning off that exposure to futures. So I wouldn't really have the answer to that. I'm not quite sure.
And, let's also look now. I hate bringing this up because the halving.
Do it. You have to say
you're a halving person. You're a halving person. I don't get this because it's the most telegraphed thing that ever happened. It's right there in the white paper. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows about it. It was this whole thing the retail customer doesn't. They know about it. My mom knows about it. And if you've met my mom, you'd be surprised she knows about the halving. So sure. Why is there this when we look at the coins that go out into the market, mm-hmm. relatively speaking, from the miners, it's not that much of a big deal anyway. So why is this all of a sudden this voodoo around halving?
Sure. I think it's one of those things where I don't know if your mom knew about the last halving. I don't know her very well or at all. But I think it's one of those things that even people know that it's coming. It still has that big effect just because, again, you are reducing that output by 50%. So I think just sort of the supply and demand component bears that out over time. I know last year we saw, I think it was just under a 20% rise kind of coming up to the halving. So, who's to say what repeats, what rhymes? But even though people know about it, I still think it's one of those things that does potentially have that positive effect on Bitcoin.
Is it correlation and not? It's not causation, right? It's just it happens at the same time because things have been happening. Wild things happen, and there's a risk appetite going on because the life of Bitcoin has involved cutting interest rates in monetary policy and a lot of wild speculation and a lot of people being excited about spending money that they probably didn't earn. Mm-hmm. And so what exactly, if we didn't have the halving, does it matter?
I think it could matter. I think people do really like the halving component and like the fact that, those rewards diminish over time. So it sort of hypothetically would boost the value of existing Bitcoins. So I do think that is an important component for a lot of people. It might not be for everyone. I mean, some other people, you might not care as much about it, which is totally fair. But yeah, I think it's an important part for most people, I think.
We spoke about the long term. I just want to still hear from you about Bitcoin's volatility. It seemed pretty kind of steady over the last week when we would expect it to be going down. Tell us what can we expect for volatility with Bitcoin in the short term and then long term past this year?
That's totally fair. So I wish I had the full answer and could tell you exactly how it's going to go. But I do think that, taking an approach where you are managing the risk is sort of the key component of that. So it's going to be volatile no matter what, I think, to some degree. How much, I'm not quite sure. But kind of being able to take that approach where you're accounting for it, managing it. In the short term, I'd imagine things could get a little bit dicier just because, again, what we've seen with the SEC. But longer term, if we do get any sort of clarity that comes out of that, I would imagine things would kind of steady out. That would be my guess, but we'll see.
Mackenzie, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That was AdvisorShares ETF strategist Mackenzie Peterson.